Have you ever heard of a VHS tape that can change your life forever? It's said that somewhere, hidden in the forgotten corners of the world, exists a cursed VHS tape. A tape so dark, so full of unspeakable horrors, that watching it seals your fate. But it's not just any old horror film. This tape is alive, and it wants something from you. Imagine, what if you watched this cursed tape? What would happen if you were trapped in its deadly grip, forced to live through the terrifying images it contains? The story behind this VHS is one of pure evil, a legend passed down in whispers from generation to generation, a tape that promises only one thing: it never lets you go. Tonight we're diving into the legend of the VHS curse and what it would be like to survive it. Stay tuned, because once you hear this story, you'll never look at your old VHS tapes the same way again. It all started on a rainy Friday evening when four friends, Alex, Sarah, Jake, and Mark, gathered in their usual hangout spot, a rundown apartment above an old video rental store. The group had always been intrigued by old VHS tapes, a relic from the past that many had forgotten. But there was one story that intrigued them more than any other. The legend of the cursed tape had been passed around by locals for years, a tale so chilling it was often dismissed as nothing more than a myth. According to the story, a single VHS tape had been circulating through the town for decades. Those who watched it never lived to tell the tale. The tape was said to contain several disturbing and cryptic recordings, each one more terrifying than the last. Those who watched it would be haunted by supernatural forces, each recording seemingly tailored to the viewer's darkest fears. One day, Mark stumbled upon an old dusty box in the back of the rental store, a forgotten corner no one had dared to visit in years. Inside the box was the infamous tape, labeled simply "Do Not Watch." His curiosity got the better of him, and he showed the others. The group was skeptical but fascinated. Sarah, always the skeptic, argued that it was just a prank or a clever marketing stunt from some old horror movie. Jake was eager to see what the tape held. Alex, intrigued by the legend, suggested they watch it together. They gathered in the living room, setting up an old VCR that Jake had found in the back of the store. The rain beat down on the windows as the flickering screen of the VCR came to life. As the tape began to play, the room fell silent, all eyes glued to the screen. The footage started with a grainy shot of a darkened forest, the trees swaying in an unnatural breeze. The camera moved erratically, as though the person holding it was running. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. A woman, pale with dark, hollow eyes. Her mouth was sewn shut, and she moved in a strange, jerky motion. She reached out, her hands stretching toward the camera as if trying to warn them. The group sat in stunned silence, but Mark couldn't look away. "It's just a creepy horror flick," he muttered, trying to hide his unease. But then things started to change. The image on the screen flickered, and the woman disappeared. Instead, the camera focused on an old, decaying house, one that none of them recognized. As the camera zoomed in, they saw a shadow moving inside the house, a tall, thin figure with glowing eyes watching them. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, staring through the screen. Then the footage cut off abruptly. "Just a weird editing choice," Jake said, though he sounded less certain now. They debated whether to continue, but Sarah, now visibly shaken, insisted that they stop. "This feels wrong. It's not just a movie. It's something more. We shouldn't be watching this." But Mark, now obsessed with the strange feeling that the tape was giving him, insisted they keep going. And so they did. The next segment of the tape started with a shaky shot of a dark room, the camera focusing on a flickering candle in the center. The shadows danced wildly against the walls. Suddenly, a door creaked open, revealing a figure, a man standing in the doorway. His face was obscured by a black veil, and he was holding a knife. The group watched in silence as the man slowly approached the camera, his steps unnervingly calm. The air in the room grew heavy, and an unnatural coldness seemed to seep from the screen. It felt as though the figure was moving closer with every second, until he was inches from the lens. Then the camera shook violently, the image warping as if something was trying to break free from the tape itself. The man's veil lifted, revealing his face. An image so grotesque and warped it made Sarah scream in terror. His face was a distorted, melted mask with eyes wide open and blood pouring from them. The camera flickered, and the figure lunged toward the screen before the tape cut off. "What the hell was that?" Jake muttered, his voice trembling. "I told you we shouldn't be watching this," Sarah said, her hands shaking. "This isn't just a film. It's like it knows us." Alex, always the one to dismiss things, grabbed the remote to fast forward, but the tape wouldn't respond. The screen flickered again, and then it began to rewind on its own, faster than any normal VCR could. As the tape rewound, the air in the room grew thicker. Shadows on the walls seemed to move, as though they had a life of their own. The VCR clicked and hummed, and when the tape finally stopped, they were met with another chilling scene. This time, the footage was of a house, one they recognized all too well. It was Alex's childhood home, a place she hadn't visited in years. The camera panned through the empty rooms, each one more eerie than the last, until it came to Alex's old bedroom. There, lying on the bed, was a figure, a young girl with her back to the camera. Alex's heart stopped. The girl looked exactly like her, but older, withered, almost dead. She turned slowly, revealing a face that was a twisted version of Alex's own. The eyes were black, hollow, and she was smiling. The girl spoke, her voice a whisper that seemed to echo in their heads. "You shouldn't have watched the tape, Alex." Alex's breath caught in her throat. That's me. The camera zoomed in on the girl's face as she tilted her head and smiled even wider. "You're next." Suddenly, the footage cut to static. The group sat frozen, unable to process what they had just seen. The room felt colder, the darkness outside pressing in on them. But as the moments passed, they began to realize that the horrors of the tape were not just confined to the screen. In the corner of the room, a shadow moved, slowly at first, but then more quickly, as if something was stalking them. Mark turned to look, but there was nothing there. Still, the sense of dread grew stronger with each passing second. The tape was no longer just a recording. It had come to life. The lights flickered, the temperature dropped. A knock echoed from the door. When Mark opened it, there was no one there. But when he turned back to the others, the room was different. The walls seemed to pulse, and a figure stood in the doorway, dark and looming. It was the same figure from the tape, the woman with the sewn mouth. "I told you not to watch," the woman whispered, her voice a raspy, inhuman growl. The friends tried to escape, but every door they opened led them deeper into the house. They ran through endless corridors, each one darker
and more twisted than the last. The shadows followed them, and the air grew thick with the smell of decay. One by one, they were picked off by the malevolent forces that had been unleashed by the tape. Jake was the first to go, dragged into the darkness by a creature from the screen. Sarah was next, her screams echoing through the house as the woman with the sewn mouth reached out for her. Mark tried to fight back, but nothing worked. Every attempt to escape led him back to the same room, Alex's childhood bedroom. Alex stood there, trembling, as the last remnants of the group were consumed by the horrors of the tape. She knew that the curse was inevitable. She had tried to fight it, but it had already claimed them all. As the final scene of the tape played out, Alex realized the terrifying truth. The tape was not just a cursed object. It was a doorway that fed on fear and despair. And now it was her turn to face the final footage. The camera zoomed in on her face. "You're next," the voice whispered, and with that, the screen went black. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you won't miss what comes next. But be warned, there's always another story. And maybe, just maybe, it's already watching you.